This is Tchipakkan, and I am your host for the Otherworldly Changing Times, Changing Worlds show to keep things going all year round. The conference is coming up in 3 weeks. Yay! Do reserve if you haven't done, and encourage your friends. Tonight we are going to be talking about how Halloween has transformed from a holy day into a modern celebration, what it is and where it might be going next. I have helping me talk about this Robin Kanstein, who is a death walker and a medium, who may have more perspective on that part of it. And Jo Lynx has been around for many years, over 30 actively, an Anderson Fairy initiate and a longtime student of Orion Foxwood with his fairy seership. And I just want to get going on talking about the Halloween, which technically began in the 7th century when they dedicated the pantheon to Mary and the martyrs, and created the holy feast day of Mary and the martyrs. That was May. It was the same day that the Roman holiday of the dead was May 17th, I think it was. But then that was moved in the 8th century to October 31st, which may have been an attempt to help get the Celtic Church to start seeing the changeover of the year to becoming a Christian holiday. It was their New Year's. It's a liminal time. An awful lot of the things, the celebrations that happen and the activities of Halloween are the same things we see at New Year's. So that is a thing. Currently, as I say, I think it's a secular holiday. Americans spend 10.6 billion, that's with a B, dollars, 3.6 billion for costumes, 3.1 billion for candy, 3.4 billion for decorations, and $500 million for greeting cards. The top 5 costumes right now are Spider-Man, for kids, Spider-Man, princesses, Batman, and other superheroes, and witches. For adults, witches, vampires, ghosts, cats, and pirates. And the most popular costumes for pets are pumpkin, hot dog, bat, witch, and bumblebee. So there you go. Since there was a big challenge with during the pandemic, and trick-or-treating was cut down, but 67% people say they'll be handing out candy this year, but 51% say they're going to be decorating their yards. Okay, I'm going to have to ask Robin and Jo to chime in here. That's enough. I think that's enough trivia to get us started with.
You want to go first, Robin?
Okay, Jo, you go first.
Well, the Catholic Church did quite a lot to take over the older holiday of October 31st, with All Saints Day on November 1st. That was in the 800s. Right around 1000, they came up with All Souls Day, which was for all the dead. And that one took off because that was like what had come before, what Halloween had been. Halloween, it comes from All Hallows, All Hallows Eve, turned into Halloween. And I mean, I could give a lot more of the, the trivia. And a lot of people say it started with Samhain, a Celtic holiday, way back.
Mm-hmm.
And it really took off in the United States and went everywhere after the influx of the Irish and the Scots in the mid to late 1800s after the potato famine, because they brought it with them. Before that, it had been sort of here, but not. We got a lot of pranking came with the Irish and the Scottish, with Devil's Night, Mischief Night, that kind of thing. But there was guising in the Scottish, which poor people would go around and offer to pray for the dead, and in return would get food and money and things like that. And that's perhaps the beginning of trick-or-treating. And you started with how it's turned out. There are things, if you get into the late 70s and the early 80s, there was the rise of the slasher films that tied in with Halloween. I mean, the one in 1978 was called Halloween with Mike Myers.
Yeah.
The thing about that one that I found really interesting is Jamie Lee Curtis is the daughter of the actress that was in Psycho. So, and she was cast in part because of that.
Was she?
Yeah. That Carpenter said, he took that into account.
Yeah. Well, it was an independently made film that none of the studios would touch it. they and boy did they miss out on the money it made.
Missed out.
But then they started making their own versions with Scream and the other holiday ones.
Oh yeah.
But I just loved the fact that they wouldn't touch it until it started making a lot of money.
Yeah. Made a lot of money. I am the kind of person, I remember when I was in 5th grade, there was a party that I went to. And I ended up getting an upset stomach and wanted to go home. Because what they actually did is they were reading the Mask of the Red. What was the Poe story?
The Red Death.
The Red Death.
Yeah.
And for me, all of that was real. That was history.
Yep.
That happened. I didn't want to be there while they were doing that. But
they were reading it, not watching the movie.
Well, no. It
That's
was
true. When we were young,
you
you couldn't find a movie unless it happened to be on TV.
Yeah. Well, about the same time, there was all kinds of creature features and stuff on Saturdays and Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
But what I haven't been able to understand in the last probably 40 years now, because that's how long ago Halloween started, is the rise of all of the really vividly done slasher films in the dark. In the last 10 or 20 years, there's been a real rise in psychologically dark things that everybody's into. Like, I've read The Handmaid's Tale, but I wouldn't touch watching it. So I'm probably not one to talk about some of the stuff that's happening currently.
Yeah, I will not watch Handmaid's Tale. I read the book, and that was bad enough. It's like, no, that's too scary for me. I'm a fan of Stephen King. I read Cujo once, and I'll read the werewolves. Give me the vampires, give me the monsters, but a rabid dog and the kid dies? No, 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 not going there. That is, it's not, it's not that's not the spooky. I don't want to. Chainsaws, no. Vampires, cool.
Yeah.
Zombies, I can deal with.
Vampires are cool. Yeah. I mean, I read Handmaid's Tale when it first came out, way back in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And I found way too many parallels or connections between our society and that and where it could go. And here we are now, 40 years later, I'm going, oh my freaking nuts. Yeah, there's an entire wing of our country that was good.
I
don't know if I want to go any further.
An interview with Margaret Atwood, and she wanted to write a dystopian novel in the manner of 1984 and Fahrenheit 451. And she wanted it to be as real as possible. She actually looked at history and the beginnings of our country and what things had actually happened in the world with these kinds of things. And that's what she based her novel on. She decided that because of our Puritan beginnings, we would more likely go that way than differently.
And she had it very well based, and we're seeing it starting to happen today. I mean, you've got the women who are in very high positions and are going to be immune or going to be above what that stuff does to the rest of the women. There are a few that are in a very high caste, and they won't be subject to what they're doing to everyone else, just like in Handmaid's Tale.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't freaking care.
Yeah.
Can we go back to Halloween? Let's not.
Oh, wait, I was looking at the chat.
Yes, please, Halloween would be good.
Yeah, it's spooky, and you know, that which is really scary. One of the things about Halloween was it was a time of license. They gave the young crazy guys, thinking back to the movies that we were just talking about, The Purge. It's like one night a year you're allowed to do whatever without consequences. That was kind of what Halloween was like. You could steal somebody's gate and put it on your bonfire, or you could tip over somebody's outhouse, or toilet paper their tree, or egg their house. And they're still doing that. That's still happening. But it's supposed to be, it was supposed to have remained humorous. In the accounts I read about it from the early part of the 20th century, they wanted it to be humorous and witty.
And it was a night of mischief, but it had to be
a tic tac. They had something that they called a tic tac, where you'd take a tack and stick it into the windows had panes. They were divided in those days, and you'd stick it into the wood and hang a dark thread over it with a small another tack or a piece of hardware, and run the thread out to the bushes. and then you would jerk on it and make it tap on the window. And the homeowner would come and check the window, and there would be nothing there because you let it out enough so that they couldn't see the tack, all like, and the black thread would not be visible. Things like that were, a lot more, you wanted to get something you could brag about, how witty it was. And, but that is
how clever. And yes,
you wanted to be clever, as opposed to my brother who got a jack-o'-lantern smashed over his head when he was 12.
oh yes,
They
I'm
said
sorry.
once, especially when you get young men, early teens, and if alcohol gets involved, restraint goes out the window.
One of the things I read about was in the 30s, in the early 30s, still during the Depression, some of the tricks went way over the top. All right. In 1933, there were young men that were cutting down telephone poles.
Yeah.
Doing other things that were really not wanted. And this began the beginnings of the haunted houses, because they would put together a haunted house that you could be in and you wouldn't be out on the streets figuring out what your next prank was going to be.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing.
Now, I remember back, because I've always been a Halloween aficionado, back in the early 70s when I was in college, I was still living at home, and I decided I was going to make a really, really spooky environment for the kids that came there. So I plopped stereo speakers in the two front windows of the house, because we had a house that was, it had a central front entrance and a lovely full view storm door. So I put speakers in the front. I queued up Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, because everybody knew that from, Phantom of the Opera and other things. And I dressed all in black with a black cape with a hood, and then put a candle in one hand. I stood at the back of the house. And when kids would come up, we'd cue up the music. I'd cue up the music, and I would walk with that candle held in front of me so they could just see little bits of my face, but not much, and the other hand outstretched. And when I got to the front door, you'd see all the gangs of kids. The guys in the front would be going like, oh crap, and backpedaling as fast as they could, while the guys in the back hadn't seen it, were trying to get up the steps and on the little teeny tiny front porch, trying to push forward to get candy. So we were lucky we didn't have anybody fall off the sides of the porch, because it was really just a stew, but it was very funny. And then they'd all get their candy. And then we became the most popular neighborhood. It was like, all of a sudden our volume went from, we get like 20 kids a night to we got like 100. And one of the best ones was this one little girl. She was about 6 years old, and her dad was standing at the street. She came up and she went this. And when I held out my hand, and with that, with the candle in front of me, holding at my hand to ask for her to take my hand, reaching for her, she backed down the steps one at a time, going, no. And she finally got so she went, okay, and crossed her arms and gave me both her hands to take. And I led her up to the porch, and then I gave her candy. Well, 15 minutes later, she and her dad were back with her older brother, and she was giggling while her older brother went through the terror. It was one of the, and her dad was laughing the whole time she was going through it. And she was just gleefully jumping up and down at her older brother being absolutely terrified. It was fun.
It is to be able to give them that thrill, to give them the experience of a of a scary movie, of a fright house
In a safe environment.
in a safe environment. One of the interesting things is watching the progression. One of the books I read was about the noted that it was in the 50s and 60s was the height of the trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating really did not start until the 40s, as in an attempt to get them away from the pranking. But what happened in the 40s? They had the war, they had victory gardens, they had paper drives and metal drives and whatever. Everybody was community focused. The guys came home, you had a community focused Halloween where you put on your mask and you go to the neighbor's house. Here you are, a little 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and you open the door and it looks just like a normal person's house. And they give you something nice and you've got a mask on, so you know they're not being nice to you because they know your parents. They are genuinely nice. It was a community building thing. Then you get to the 70s and you got the Tylenol scare and I guess that was in the 80s, but the poisoned pixie sticks, which there are only 2 actually confirmed deaths in the Halloween scares. And the one was a kid who was supposed to have gotten heroin laced candy, but it turned out, no, he got into the heroin that his uncle kept around the house. And it wasn't in the candy. And the uncle tried to say that it was the trick or treat. And the other was the father who had quietly gotten life insurance policies on his 2 kids and put cyanide in their pixie sticks. And one little boy died, and his sister, they found the pixie stick because she didn't like the pixie sticks. But in that point in the 70s, there was a change in Halloween. In the 50s and 60s, we had mostly apples, popcorn, donuts,
candy bars,
homemade stuff.
Actually, when
the candy bars, oh God, you loved anybody who gave you a candy bar. You get it the 70s, and if it wasn't commercially wrapped, it wasn't supposed to be safe. So all the homemade stuff, all the popcorn went away.
I remember I remember my earliest trick-or-treating in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And it was mostly you might have gotten an apple here or there and an orange here or there, but most of it at that point was just getting a candy bar or, something like that. But it was a mix of fruits and candy bars. And the earliest I can remember is when I was 4 years old. And then from there on out, but that was it.
When I was a kid, it was mostly apples and homemade and apples and popcorn, bags of popcorn balls. And if you have never had a fresh homemade popcorn ball, you really ought to try it.
I never had one of those.
Fantastic.
I didn't start the earliest trick-or-treating I can remember was 1959.
Yeah, I think I started in 55, but I'm old. But but the thing is, then they switched over to commercial, and then they switched over in the 80s. It had mostly switched over to parents driving their kids. It was no longer this rite of passage where you'd be able to go out and get things that just by that it wasn't sending the kids out alone. The parents had to be with them, and that switched over to then they came up with the houses and other things, but they switched over to what I remember as my kids were doing it. They had, they'd like to go to the, to apartment houses, because you could go from door to door to door in an apartment house and fill your bag very much.
Yeah,
So,
you could get 50 doors in 15 minutes.
but whereas and they just stopped coming out here where we weren't, when we were in the center of town, we'd get 200 a night. And we moved
And
out
not
here.
only am I
Nobody comes. So,
Yeah, I'm not only in the center of the night, but I have not had a single trick or treater since 1994, when we were still in an ex-suburban townhouse. We moved to a rural area, and now where we are at the end of a little dirt road.
Yeah.
0.3 of a mile from down another little dirt road that's 0.7 of a mile from the paved road, and we're a farm. And no, we have not had a trick or treater. And now what the community does, because it's so rural, is they take the community center and they do like a tailgate party for trick or treating.
Oh yeah, I read about that. They call it trunk or treat.
Trunk or treat, yes. That.
And so that's the new thing, that and the haunted houses. But it's turned into huge business, which means it's secular.
Yeah.
Not that the Christians aren't. Yeah. Joe, did you have something on that?
Yeah. Well, my city does, the downtown, all the merchants downtown have one day that they advertise, and they have treats for the kids. And so the kids go downtown to all the little restaurants and gift shops and things like that in the middle of the day. But in a lot of places where I live in general, people don't think it's safe to be out anymore after dark.
The traffic fatalities for children always went up in the second half of the 20th century, because the kids weren't paying attention, the cars weren't paying enough attention. It was not a good thing for the traffic fatalities. That's maybe why parents go out with their kids.
I also think it has to do with a rise in fear of crime and things like that.
Yeah,
Depending on what part of town you're in.
News has promoted crime as much as the movies have.
Yeah.
But it's just like the Satanic Panic from the 90s that made people, that created a whole new genre of terror that they could exploit. Oddly enough, the 60s had, that was, in my opinion, the golden age of Hammer horror. Peter Cushing and Vincent Price and Christopher Lee. I mean, there has never been a Dracula like Christopher Lee.
Oh no, never.
but it's a we like the safe scares. We just, a horror movie is like a, what do they call them? Amusement park ride. It feels like you're out of control, but you know you're safe. That's what we want. And
I have a question.
Yes.
Have any of you, I don't know where you're located, but have any of you noticed a distinct thing that I have seen over the last 10 years, where in areas where there are a lot of evangelical Christians, that Halloween has become dubbed as Satan's holiday, and you must not participate in any way. You don't give candy, you don't take trick-or-treaters, you don't your kids dress up, you don't acknowledge that it's the devil's holiday. Have any of you noticed that? I mean, I've seen an upsurge in various areas.
That has become more, it's mostly a 21st century thing, as the right-wing evangelical Christians have noticed that there's an upswing in people who refer to themselves as secular, as spiritual, not religious, as pagans, and they are afraid of the pagans. And they said, "Oh my goodness, it's not just in movies; it's real." Actually, there was a documentary about a scary house that was, what was the name of it?
Hell House.
It was a Christian, yeah. It was all things that were supposed to scare good Christian kids. I was like, holy Moses! They're willing to do a fright house, but not just so long as it tries to scare them into being more compliant. I have just put the recipes for a fake cake and for pan de muerto in the chat. So if you would like to try making those things, you can save it by pushing the 3 dots at the bottom of the chat. I am into foods. I like holidays, and I like the foods that we use to share them with. The fake cake is one that came from a book that was written it was a Little Colonel series. Unless you're from the South, you've never heard of the Little Colonel, unless of course you're a Shirley Temple fan. And it's a cake everybody at your party. It's like it's like cornbread, but instead you put a quarter of a cup of salt in it, so it's really salty. Alternate versions have people taking the yolk out of an egg and filling it with salt and eating it, or having very salty bread, which is also a protective charm you can keep in your pocket to keep you safe from witches. But you eat this salty thing, and then you dream that night of somebody bringing you a drink, and that will tell you who you're going to, does it come in a golden cup? Does it come in a wine cup? Does it come in a tin cup? That tells you, if in theory, it could be, if it's brought to you by a young man, then that's going to be the man you'll marry, or girl. And they also bake charms in it. And
it sounds very similar to like the king or the Mardi Gras cakes.
The charms being baked into it, which you can also do. I personally believe in getting, I only want to use crystals or silver, because that's not going to contaminate the cake. But they have other ones. Every Halloween, I have colcanon. And colcanon is an Irish dish that is basically mashed potatoes with some form of cabbage in it. I like it with cabbage. I like it with kale. Kale's prettier. And I put lots of onions, and unlike the Irish of the time, lots of butter and cream. So if you use what you can afford, but basically it's like mashed potatoes with cabbage or kale and onions and lots of butter fat. And that's the one that I'm not going to skip on Halloween. Other things that are popular at that time of year, and we haven't mentioned how a lot of let's say, try and translate it in my head, the gunpowder plot, when you had the Guy Fawkes Day, a lot of the things that they had been doing for Halloween were transferred 5 days later to Guy Fawkes Day, where you'd get the bonfires and they would burn the guy. And they are now doing a lot of burning of effigies. They're still, bonfires remain popular. But also associated with them are toffee and I like to make toffee on the 5th of November. Caramel and it's a thing, but also pumpkin seeds. I will put it. Let me put a herbalist view on pumpkin seeds. If you are making a jack-o'-lantern and you take the pumpkin seeds out of the goo and put them on a cookie sheet with some salt and you roast them. They are delicious. And also they are anti-parasitic. So if you, once a year, if you have fiddleheads in the spring and you have your pumpkin seeds in the fall, then you clean out all the parasites that Americans don't think they have, they do anyway. So, but you know, soul cakes, I think somebody has already mentioned soul cakes. It was a great deal. In around the 11th and 12th century, they noticed that there were ghosts. And having been told that when you died, you were buried and you waited till Resurrection Day. And this happened after the year 1000, when people gathered on hilltops and waited to be taken up into heaven, and then, having given all their stuff away, had to go back and try and get it to whoever they'd given it to. Then they said, okay, so I guess we're going to have to wait to be resurrected later. But they noticed there were a lot of ghosts around, so that was when they invented purgatory. And purgatory gave the church a wonderful opportunity to say, well, you know, they weren't bad enough to go to hell, but they weren't good enough to go to heaven. So what you need to do is say masses for the soul and pray for them. So they came up with these things where they would make soul cakes or various breads, and they would give them out. And in theory, in the ancient way of doing it, these were breads that they would put dried fruit, currants, cinnamon, whatever. And so it was a nice little bun, and you would give them out to the poor that would come by, and it was charity. But in exchange for each soul cake, they were supposed to pray for, and theoretically they would do it right in front of you. That you'd give them the piece of food, and they would then pray for your dead husband. So a widow who loved her husband would make lots of soul cakes. And of course, you bet the poor would know which people had the best loot, the best food. That can, the other version of where did trick-or-treating come from could be that those from Scotland and Ireland who believed that the veil was getting thin would put out, somehow both the dead and the fairies could get out more easily. And so they would put out offerings, and they would put out milk, and they would put out food, and they put out, this goes back to the wild hunt, and many, many types of wild hunt would have, they would put out a food for the people, and you'd get blessed if they accepted the food offerings, and you could get cursed if you had not put anything out. This is not unlike that. So people would put out food for the goblins that were being freed. So how difficult is it to get dressed up as a goblin and go out and help yourself to any of the goodies that had been left out by the superstitious old wives? So as a matter of fact, there were, what was it? I think it was the 15th century, some town outlawed, they would put out a supper, and then they would go to mass for All Saints, and they would come back, and All Souls, sorry, got to keep those two straight. All Saints Day, Halloween was for all of, it was the evening before All Saints Day, and then the next day was All Souls Day. Although in Mexico, they have it with the first is for the saints, the second is for the children, Los Angelinas, and the third is for the adults. So it's kind of cool. I think it's because they want to have kind of a kids party for the returning kids, and with the kind of thing kids would like. And guys, that, you know, the adults want the same things they wanted when they were alive as adults, and they want the liquor, and they want the tobacco, and they want those things. And so they have two different kinds of parties, but they would have the food that, and they would just go. what was an offering was then being accepted. And the story I was going for was this city said, no, you're not allowed to do that anymore. Since they know that everybody in town is leaving their doors open and leaving their food out for their dead, we get a huge influx of thieves every All Saints Day and All Hallows Eve. And you can't do that anymore because you're just inviting the thieves in. And so they made them say, no, you can't do that anymore. But how far of a leap is it that's where the kids started saying, okay, trick or treat.
And that's an interesting analogy, looking at, you can't just open your doors, but then people put things on their front porch or in their yard, in a place, as offerings to the dead and to whatever. And then how did that evolve until, because putting things out on your front porch or your yard or in a special place doesn't invite, nasties and theft, but the trick or treat. And the whole thing is, how do you map the Christian Halloween traditions that we see now back to pagan Samhain and that thinning of the veil, and how do we reconcile all of that?
Well, we keep coming up with things. We are not quite as imaginative as the Victorians were. People may or may not have heard that Samhain is the name of the Lord of the Dead. This was written by a British self-described scholar who moved to Ireland in, I think it was like 1780s. And he kept writing things about Irish folklore, and he kept getting them wrong. And he was much put down by the academics of the time for his things like saying that Samhain was the name of the Lord of the Dead. Yet this gets hauled out every time the Christians are trying to put Samhain down again. And yeah, Samhain basically is New Year's, but and
Samhain is a cross quarter. Period.
It's a cross quarter. It is a.
It's an astronomical event.
But as New Year's, it is a liminal time, and any time that things get liminal, we can get a lot more magic done.
Yeah,
and you can. It's an observable thing for people who look at how easy is it for another. Okay, here, let's call this one on. Anybody out there? Has other people noticed that when they say the veil gets thin at Samhain, and then it goes back, but anybody else noticed that it's thinner? It's like climate change. It's your highs and lows. The highs get higher and the lows get not as high, and the veil gets thinner.
The climate and the weather changes. The speed of the light change between sunrise and sunset changes. It's an acceleration point. Then there are a lot of other things that happen. There's temp changes. There's the fall of the leaves shifts dramatically. All the things you notice. And yeah, all of a sudden after Mabon, you go, whoa, it's been accelerating. And now it reaches the point where it starts to slow getting into Yule. The momentum of the decline of light starts to shift a little. It's been rapidly, going down. You get that because the quarters are where that happens, where it accelerates. And then you go, and there are a lot of other things. There are shifts in, you've done the harvest. The harvest is completed. Now you're preparing for winter. There are a lot of shifts that happen between Mabon and Samhain. And Samhain is really one of the transition points. Like you said, it can be the new year, depending on which of many pagan things you follow that place New Year's at several things. And I'm not going to get into that debate. But it is a point where it's a shift. It's a huge shifting point in what's going on in your environment, and probably also in your perception and how you start to deal with things. Even down to the most basic things like, what do I do when I get up in the morning? How do you might rearrange your schedule for the day. There's lots of stuff that happens here.
As far as,
and yes, speak.
as
Sorry.
far as the veil getting thinner, I have noticed that, but I've noticed that it's thinner all year long.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Thinnest around.
I have noticed that it ends at all of the 8 points in the wheel. And there are certain points within those that it does, depending on what's happening astronomically and where things are aligned. Yeah, there are other things go, this week or today is like really, certain things are aligned. Or it can happen at any point, but these are key points. All 8 points of the wheel, I find the veil is very thin.
Mm-hmm. Well, Samhain and Beltane especially,
Right.
but Yule, Yule is kind of like high tide, whereas Samhain is when the tide's coming in. And I don't know if anybody here, some people will put the holidays on the full moons nearest the date. I'm not entirely, it depends on what your particular practice is. And I tend to use the dates, but
no, and I tend to go with the astronomical dates, not the calendar dates.
okay.
I actually like to practice, if I do, the secular holiday of Halloween on the 31st. And then I do my pagan practice on the astronomical date.
Yes,
That's what
I do.
7th.
And it worked beautifully.
Yeah.
Of course, every now and then you get both on the same day, and you got to go, all right, it's once every 7 or 8 years. All right. Yeah, I got to do 2 things on one day.
Yeah. But, it is nice when you can say, well, coming up, split, you can celebrate with your pagan friends at solstice, and then you can do Christmas with your or Hanukkah with your blood family, because the blood is good. And it's like I would like to talk a little more about ancestors, because a lot when we get into the when we are dealing with the religious aspects, we're dealing with an ancestral holiday of putting out. Anybody here do dumb suppers? There you go. Anyone else?
I have done 1 or 2. I'm just getting started in that.
Yeah. It's cool. I also will put liquor on my parents' graves. Apparently many cultures will pour milk on the graves. Fairies seem to like milk. I'm not sure why, but maybe it's because
I would do
like
that.
milk and cream, and
I would love to do that,
but I think
except
with
for that
ancestors,
my
it's-
parents' graves are about 250 miles away.
yeah, it's a lot, and a lot of it has to do with oh gosh, there was a funny movie called High Spirits with Peter O'Toole, and they were saying, okay, there's spirits here. There's spirit. He was trying to cash in on the paranormal trick and save his castle, and they had and so then when the ghosts got ticked with the commercialization and they started coming out and doing hauntings, and they're like, well, what do we put out for milk? We put milk for them? They booze? Is it the Irish ones do? Which I thought was a great line. Yes, we know the Irish ones like the drink. Yeah, if you haven't watched High Spirits, it's old and probably hard to find, but it's a very funny movie.
It's funny.
Oh, I haven't watched it yet this year.
By the way, not just the Irish, as do the Scots.
Yes, well, the Scots were the ones who actually brought most of the pranking to the to America. That was a very Scottish thing. What can we get away with? And of course,
well, it's a Scots thing to do.
Well, I suppose you do your worst pranks on the people you didn't care for, but it was. But you want to honor the ancestors, and you see a lot of that with the beautiful women who would come and visit homes, and you'd put food out for them, and the female versions of the Wild Hunt, and I particularly like the fact that the many times when the ancestors come, they're telling you, will you lighten up? You're weeping and moaning for us. We're great. You're the ones who still have problems. Your tears are a burden to us. And so I think that to work with your ancestors in a positive way is what we need to do. But we have that. We have those of us who are learning shamanic skills, those of us who have access to mediums, those of us who don't need to see the food go away to know that the essence of the food has been accepted by the spirits. That is something that we can be aware of. We can let our if you think of the candy you pass out as an offering to the world, the offering to the spirit world is like, I'm giving to the community so that I'm trying to do something good. That if you see as an offering, it's not a sacrifice, it's not an offering unless you freaking blessed it. But the minute you bless it, a Reese's bar will be just as much an offering as a bowl of milk would be. You see what I'm saying? That's a
really awesome concept. Thank you.
If we are looking at the energy, and that's what we do, we study, how do these things work? It's like, yeah, you take any piece of food and you bless it, and the energy will go that way. You say, this offering is being taken. I mean, anytime the porridge was put on the porch, some animal was taking it as an offering until they started putting out something that the teenagers wanted to grab.
Robin has their hand up.
Yeah, nature will provide an eager mouth. Why is candy corn so reviled? I like it. You can like it. I personally don't care for it. I am perfectly willing to celebrate those disgusting, there's a holiday, the 28th of October is those disgusting little pumpkin shaped candies day. We all know what we're talking about. And yes, somebody likes them. You know, some people like Snickers and some people like Twix. I
Robin
think
has
that,
her hand raised.
oh, good. Let's, Robin, unmute. Can we unmute you?
There you go. One of the things that I try to work with people on when they've got departed family members is first and foremost, include them in your day-to-day, have meals with them, set out food with them. Continue to treat them like they're still there. Because you do not know what a world of good that does for those who are still here, to be able to continue to include those gone in the daily life, and those who are gone, they feel included. You know, they let them know that, and it's easier that way for them to set up a communication between the two of them.
Excellent. And it occurs to me just now, in front of your very faces, that if you are pagan, if you work with any of the tricksters, if you like the pranking aspect and you will actually stop to ask them, they may tell you, yes, that's funny, and no, that's going a little bit too far. Now, perhaps we could teach that to our younger pagan members. It's like, yeah, check in and find out if it's acceptable before you push the envelope too far. I don't, you know, my kids were raised pagan. They just take so much of this for granted. Of course, there are people all over, there are spirits all around us. Of course, there are gods around us. Of course, there are ghosts all around us. That's the way the world is. And I guess this is one of the things that I noticed in the previous show about Ouija boards. Many of the things that were the stories that were spooky was just the fact that they worked, and that scared the out of people. They didn't like that it worked. And when you have accepted, oh yeah, the world is full of weird and spooky stuff, that doesn't scare you anymore. That hasn't thrown you into a tizzy, and it's just, oh yeah, that's true. Oh sure, okay, that picture fell down. That was my mother expressing that she thought that our language was a little too salty. It's not scary anymore. So,
Again, how much of this is where we are, as pagans or whatever, are very open to this and don't have a problem, where there are really the Christian evangelical people go, whoa, this is a major problem. Yeah, this means somebody's going to hell. This is going, and this is something to be afraid of. How can we bridge that gap?
Well,
I find mediums are the best, and they can think of them as being angelic messengers. How about you, Jo?
well, I'm going to back up a little bit. I think it depends on the culture, how you approach whether or not most spirits are okay or not. I mean, my husband's Chinese, and China has a Hungry Ghost Festival. That's in Tibetan and in Buddhist tradition, but it's all over Asia. And the hungry ghosts are unsettled ghosts. And so it depends on how you look at the spirits, you know. So the 15th day of the 7th month of the lunar year is the ghost festival. And people put out food and things like that because they don't want to be seen by, they don't want to be bothered by those spirits. You know, and so if I go back to myths with out of Northwestern Europe, and you look at you know, the wild hunt and things like that, there was a whole lot of belief in spirits that weren't going to be good to you. You know, it's the same way with the fairy faith. Like, I put out heavy cream for my guy because that's what they really like. But and not everybody.
Who doesn't like butter?
Yeah, not everybody is. Not everybody out there is nice and sweet, and there's a lot of stuff, at least in the love and light side of things, in the pagan community that has downplayed dangers of many different types of spirits, but the fae in particular.
Yes, and I deal with things as I encounter them individually. Each one is its own thing. But I grew up in an area in the evangelical Christian South, very, very bad, predominantly Baptist, where if you even acknowledged that there were spirits that were either angels in heaven or they were banished to hell, they didn't exist. And that was and yeah, somebody had a ghost. Well, it must be somebody who was, basically in hell, but it was, and you didn't acknowledge it. You went, no, it doesn't exist. I grew up in a weird environment, and that still is very prevalent in certain geographic areas and with certain spiritual preferences or religious preferences. They are there. And how does that fit into this whole thing?
Well, we have to be careful about them, but we are now at the end of our time, and so I guess we're gonna. Anybody have any final questions or thoughts, or shall we wrap it up?
I was thinking about your question on the Korean and Japanese horror movies, right? If you think about their culture, you've got Shintoism, which is basically animism, and there are other Eastern religions where the belief in spirits is very, very strong. And this may well play into how their ghosts are portrayed.
Yes.
Yeah. But I don't think there's much we can do when someone has chosen to barricade themselves in a wall of ignorance that says, I'm going to only believe what I was told to believe. You can't change their mind. You can't change their mind about the election. You can't change their mind about religion. You can't change their mind about anything. So you just try not to trigger them. It's like anybody who's crazy, don't trigger them. and meanwhile, we can go along being happy. But okay, so remember to save the chat if you want to have the recipes, and we will see you again next week.
How do you save the chat?
There's 3 dots over at the very bottom where you write things down.
All right,
and those are where you.
I'm looking for 3
dots over on the right, where you write. And there's probably differences from one thing to another. But I'm going to now stop
I'm just gonna go up to the top of the chat.